The Backrooms has ruined a generation of horror. But what if I told you it was initially supposed to save it? The liminal space trend was big around COVID time, from 2019 to around 2022, and it was initially due to a 4chan thread sharing a strange picture of an office space, which is now known as the Backrooms, and the Backrooms has online amassed 163 million views of the small video series by Kane Pixels on YouTube, and 2 billion views on hashtag liminal spaces on TikTok by November 2022, which is almost 2 years ago now. But I'm not going to explain the phenomenon of liminal space in this video, as I'd rather focus on the topic that you've seen in the title, which is why the Backrooms has ruined a generation of horror. Liminal space has been very prevalent in media in the past couple of years, especially video games such as Minecraft and source games like Portal and Garry's Mod. Liminal spaces goes much further back than that, less with the topic itself, but more with the attempt at a cultural and generational reset of horror as a whole. Throughout its history in literature, horror has scarcely developed beyond its creativity in terms of different monsters and settings. Through the 1800s we had werewolves and Dracula, we had Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and other forms of body horror, which was very prevalent at the time. However, in the 1920s, a new form of horror was on the rise. With the end of the First World War, people had finally seen real horrors firsthand. Legs getting blown off, faces disfigured by shrapnel, bullets, shells. How could the same people who have experienced these horrors be scared of vampires and mad scientists? This is where H.P. Lovecraft came in. If you have a fear of spiders or clowns, it's highly likely that you weren't actually born with that fear, but rather learnt it. However, there is one fear that every human is born with, and that's the fear of the unknown. Lovecraftian horror emphasizes the horror of the unknown and the incomprehensible, creatures that may or may not exist, and either way, if you try too hard to think about it, it will drive you insane. The easiest way to explain this to a modern audience is the movie Bird Box, where as soon as you look at the creature, you're driven insane and instantly try to commit suicide or kill others around you. The unexplainable nature of this horror and these stories is what made it so terrifying to the contemporary audience, and still some modern audiences to this day. The influence and impact of H.P. Lovecraft is still great to this day, and I doubt you could find a lot of people who don't know who Cthulhu is. Lovecraft was a generational and cultural reset of horror, and I believe that the Backrooms was supposed to be our generational and cultural reset of horror. So what went wrong? After Lovecraft's death in 1937, and the revelation of a Second World War 2 years later, horror was hit in a strange way. Western countries in the 1950s and 60s were trying to recover from World War II, and they mostly did this by acting as if nothing had happened. If you look at Fallout, for example, which is popular with this show that's just come out, you'll see the futuristic and almost utopian shift that 50s architecture and design had. And this was for a reason. People wanted to move away from the culture of the world before the wars, the gulf of classes, and the upheaval of traditional conservative art styles and culture as a whole. And the same can be said for horror, with Stephen King in the 70s and 80s, who had grown up in the 50s and 60s, who reintroduced the world to monsters and horror. And despite his attempts to return to Lovecraftian and psychological horror with The Shining and The Mist, They were nowhere near as critically acclaimed as books like It, which, even though they had celestial elements such as the turtle at the end, people were more focused on Pennywise the Clown, especially with the miniseries that came a few years after the novel itself. The influence of Stephen King and the culture of the 50s of moving on from the wars meant that monsters were back in horror. We were moving away from psychological and Lovecraftian elements and back to monsters such as vampires and werewolves as we'd seen in the 1800s and all of literature before that. This pattern of monsters in horror carried on all the way to the 2010s, and even though psychological horror had made a return, especially with movies such as the Blair Witch Project, monsters were still really prevalent in horror. Up until the late 2010s, when after years of internet creepypastas, something fresh and equally as eerie came out of 4chan. If you're not careful, and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. Horror finally comes full circle, and we're back to where we started, figuring out where it went wrong. On May the 12th, 2019, 4chan thread spread an image of a strange office space, spawning theories about the backrooms. YouTube videos began spreading of images of strangely familiar yet eerie places. The phenomenon was named Liminal Space, and it described an emotion listed in the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows: anemoia, nostalgia for a time you've never known, and canopsia, the eerie atmosphere of a place that's usually bustling with people, but now abandoned. Late nights watching Liminal Space compilations now meant nothing. Ironically, I felt nostalgia for nostalgia itself. And yet I've seen nobody acknowledge this. Thousands of levels are added even if monsters are ignored, and the monsters are a big part of the backrooms now. The Backrooms had basically become the SCP Foundation, which I had grown up with and enjoyed, but I feel like they should have stayed separate. The SCP Foundation was part of this creepypasta wave, which was also a big part of monsters staying in the culture. The Backrooms was supposed to relieve everyone of this loop, but it fell victim to it. It's left me wondering, what is next for horror? Can the Backrooms make a comeback? Can Liminal Space make a comeback? Or will no one take it serious ever again?